So this is part two of our look at the CoR Party New Brunswick podcast. In part one, we talked about the rise and the success of the CoR Party in the provincial election in 1987, but we're going to talk about the downturn of the CoR Party and its eventual dissolution in the early 2000s. Now, entering their nomination convention in Campbellton in 1992, which putting a bunch of English anti-French CoR Party members in the midst of Acadie and near the Quebec border was bizarre to the extreme. I covered the convention, and let me tell you, it was a sight to see. Big crowd though. It was several thousand came out for the convention. At the time, Danny Cameron had to be chosen as interim leader because the original leader, Arch Pafford, didn't win his seat, so he decided to resign. Now, Danny decided to run for the party leadership against Bren Taylor, who was a very highly literate and intelligent MLA who basically was very stubborn as well, but we'll get about that in a second. And they had a big convention in Campbellton. Now, Cameron had been seen as a moderate candidate to replace Pafford, but Taylor was seen as more radical. Now, internal differences result in political infighting within CoR, and a year after Cameron's election, the party's executive, president, and council sought to remove him as leader, and he resisted. The party council then held a leadership race and elected Bren Taylor as a leader of the CoR at the Campbellton Convention, but Cameron and his supporters argued that the race was illegal. Now, Cameron's supporters later gained control over the party's presidency, allowing Cameron to fire a large portion of the party executive and council. Now, Taylor and Bev Ryan were kicked out of caucus in '94 due to ongoing opposition to Cameron, and during this period, party membership dropped from 20,000 members to 5,000. Now, the convention in Campbellton was bizarre to the extreme. We knew Taylor going in was going to win, but some of his speeches on the stage were completely bizarre. I covered his speech. He was making almost rhetoric comments saying that, don't blame me for the Acadian expulsion. I wasn't there. Well, Mr. Taylor, we didn't blame you for it, but bringing it up in front of the Quebec and local media, there were several occasions during the convention, especially in the parking lot of the beautiful Campbellton Memorial Civic Centre, where this being held, that the CoR Party was confronted by the francophone members of the media, including SRC, the local francophone radio stations, the French press. Brent Taylor, I know on one occasion, was asked if he was a Nazi. There was other occasions where basically that question of how they were taking Hitler's style of politicking to try to put down the French. Some of the people at the convention were basically saying, oh, the French can only last so long, that now we're here. But see, the CoR Party was built on fragility because there were one note party. Like, for example, when Scotiabank donated to the party, a lot of people basically questioned why, because their main thing was just against official bilingualism. They had no policy that I could see of economics. Most of their followers were racist, racist in my own family, racist against immigrants, racist against Jews, racist against Catholics. The good percentage of the CoR members had a chip on their shoulder regarding the changing mosaic of Canada since the 70s and the Constitution. You got to understand that the CoR Party was made up of the disgruntled PCs that didn't want to follow cooperation or the progressive conservative style or red Tory. And the internal divisions became so bizarre. It just became out of the ordinary. For a party to be so successful in their first election and to fight amongst themselves because they had 50,000 voices, or in this case 20,000 voices, but nobody running the choir. You needed a moderator to run CoR. If they were to call themselves, let's say, the Brunswick First Party or the First New Brunswick or whatever, but they showed their cards all the time. They said, we don't want bilingualism, we don't want any French, we don't want the elite French. And that's the problem with their successor. The People's Alliance, which basically is now reflecting some of CoR policies, they've been elected in the government under that hypocrite, Chris Awson. Chris Awson basically is an okay politician, but him saying they haven't adapted some of the CoR tactics to get elected is a lie. They're CoR light. The Progressive Conservatives in New Brunswick right now, which actually the Premier of New Brunswick, the Conservative leader, is a former CoR member, Blaine Higgs. He's become a moderate, and I have to respect him for that. I basically saw many CoR members were very radical at the time, where they had a group of CoR moderates that basically wanted a better understanding of what they were feeling, but nobody was listening. Now, by the time that Cameron eventually chose to resign their leadership to help settle the divisions within the party, the entire party membership was allowed to vote in the raids that allowed pro-Brent Taylor candidate Gary Ewart, who was not a sitting MLA, was chosen over the pro-Cameron Greg Hargrove. But neither Ewart nor caucus member Ab Rector were able to resolve their differences with Cameron supporters, and Ewart resigned 23 days later, leaving their party in limbo, and CD infighting was going on. Now, by the time of the 95 provincial election, the executive put Greg Hargrove in charge for the 95 vote, but the damage was done. None of the party's 8 members were returned, and he only got 7.1% of the popular vote, which was cut by 1/4 from the last vote, placing him well behind the New Democrats. Now, by 1989, Conservative voters were completely wooed back by the charismatic leadership of Bernard Lord, who used an appeal to the former CoR members and to the right-wing PCs to join up to defeat the Liberals, and that's what he did. And he got power. Now, the CoR that year, led by Jim Webb, slipped further in the vote with just 2,807 votes, or 1% of the total. And following the election, Colby Fraser, who had run federally for the party in '88, replaced Webb as leader. But by 2001, the party was little more than a few files in Fraser's computer in his basement. And at the time, Fraser contacted remaining members, who voted to dissolve the party, and the dissolution was official on March 31st, 2002. Now, you got to understand this. For 13 years, they changed politics in New Brunswick. Many of their members have gone on to some success through the years, including Blaine Higgs, but it came down to it. They're a one-issue party, and that's where the People Alliance comes in. They can tell everybody they're not anti-bilingualism, but they appeal to the latent CoR, or CoR Light as I call them, to basically throw up support. And their major support, again, like the Blue Corridor was talking about, in the greater Frankton area, including Carleton County, they could have played it right. The last provincial election, New Brunswick could easily won between 5 and 7 seats, and probably got a little bit more of the CoR vote out, but they didn't, what they call, campaign enough. And the thing is about People's Alliance, they're not running candidates in most of the Francophone ridings, which is sure bet they're taking the more right-wing aspects of CoR, applying it that how they can apply it to the People's Alliance, and going from there. But Chris Austin, I can tell you that I've interviewed him before, I met him before. He's not a bad gentleman, but anybody that says that People's Alliance is not of the son of CoR or daughter of CoR is CoR Light is wrong. We still have a good percentage of this province, 10 to 15%, that are radical against stopping bilingualism in the province. So to get the extra 5% is a protest vote, but at the majority, 20 to 25% of New Brunswickers either are on the fence about bilingualism or totally against it because of rural New Brunswick. Rural English New Brunswick has never accepted bilingualism because he sees it as hurting the civil service, where people are required to be bilingual to have a job. I still believe there could be some flexibility on the bilingualism file, but as long as the People's Alliance is still around, as long as Blaine Higgs is a representative for the PCs, he's former CoR, there's going to be trepidation from the Acadian Francophone population in New Brunswick. Now, the immigrant boom that we're seeing in New Brunswick, maybe in 10 years from now, you're not going to see anti-bilingualism anymore, because the majority of people in New Brunswick will be either current immigrants or supportive of the immigrants' experience, where basically English and French are not really as important as it should be. We know Francophone populations or unilingual Francophone populations are going down in New Brunswick. We know that population in New Brunswick remains at 750,000 people, and say like Rodney King, maybe one day we'll work it out. But I don't know. There was a rise of English-speaking Canadians in New Brunswick, the rise of the CoR Party in New Brunswick, their fall, the re-rise of the People's Alliance. We still have some work to do for people to understand what bilingualism is in this province. And With Trump rising to power, was that a factor? With the People's Alliance getting all the support? Maybe so. Can I call CoR a populist party? Well, no, because the CoR was a one-issue party. A populist party is more than one issue. And I can't tell you what CoR stood for. And what was strange about CoR, I would cover CoR events in northern New Brunswick throughout the campaigns and the federal and provincial campaigns, the late 80s, early 90s. When people saw the media there, they would completely freak out. They were scared that they would be outed as CoR supporters. They didn't want bilingualism, but they were scared to come out and say, I'm anti-bilingualism because it would be seen as racist. Well, I wouldn't say they're racist. They're just basically uninformed Anglos. Anybody who believes bilingualism doesn't benefit Canada and New Brunswick, I can't talk to you, because economically, socially, job-wise, being bilingual creates work. It creates a great atmosphere to promote tourism. You look at all of Quebec come to New Brunswick because you know it's a bilingual province. You can imagine if New Brunswick wasn't bilingual. You have to adapt over the years. New Brunswick is a province of two main cultures, the Francophone culture and the Anglophone culture. And anybody who wants to fight against it doesn't really... It's almost like a Toronto Maple Leaf fan that would come along and say, I don't want to see Montreal Canadiens on the TV because they're French, where the Quebec Nordiques are in the background like the 80s. Like one of the CoR party members, he said maybe he'll stop the Montreal Canadiens being shown on Hockey Night in Canada. I said, what about the Nordiques? He said, oh, well, them too. Well, I said, how come you didn't see Nordiques? There was people in the CoR party, actually, in my own family, and still are, that support the People's Alliance. And, I'm going, you can't do it being a one-issue party. If you're going to get something done, you have to have a better platform. Make that as one of your key points, but talking about how being French hurts the economy, but show me something different, show me something better, and you can't. Because bilingualism works. It's the way it goes. But don't quote me. I've only been 37 years covering bilingualism issues, and I know what works. But I can tell you right now, the People's Alliance there, they have an opportunity, or did have an opportunity, to have more power in the legislature. But is this a one-trick pony? Time will tell. The CoR was a one-trick pony, and you had more organization, more money, more great members, more development than CoR ever had. I mean, CoR had Pafford, Taylor, Cameron, all these great former PCs, and it still fell apart. That's the way it goes. You have to be focused in politics. And don't forget, the Greens are rising in New Brunswick. A lot of CoR former supporters may vote Green because they see Green as a better option for their future, where basically they're not a one-issue party, but they don't really talk about bilingualism all the time. When you talk just language, it doesn't last. French or English. Same thing with the Parti Acadien. Parti Acadien was like the CoR party. You want to separate Northern New Brunswick from New Brunswick. That's never going to happen. Anyway, that's just my opinion. So on this beautiful February day, thanks for listening. And if you don't like what I had to say, please leave a comment. But if you're bully, you will be blocked. Like a guy who commented on my Peter MacKay the other day said Peter MacKay shouldn't be allowed to be Prime Minister because he's not bilingual. Well, what about Hatfield not speaking French and being, Premier of New Brunswick all those years? Andrew Scheer wasn't perfect in French. He almost won Prime Minister. Stephen Harper wasn't perfect in French. A lot of people think Justin Trudeau is a little bit too perfect in French. So it's all attitude. Anyway, have a good day. Bye.